Well, welcome. It's great to see everyone showing up for this topic. We were a little nervous. Clarin was saying, reminding me that it's spring break for a lot of the schools, and we were concerned that folks might be off doing other interesting things with their kids. But it's great to see you all here, and happy St. Patrick's Day. I fear I am not wearing green once again, but hopefully everyone is celebrating St. Patrick's Day in some way, assuming that it's a holiday you celebrate. So as usual for today, our topic is AI in education. And we have a couple guests, and hopefully we'll have a lively discussion among ourselves about these new tools that seem to be all over the news and all over discussions of higher education and K-12. So I'm really looking forward to this. While people are coming in, just a couple of announcement reminders. Faculty, I hope you all saw the announcement from Carol about the new awards from the provost, including the Provost Teaching Award, as well as the Charter Professor Awards. The college process is to have you notify me if you intend to self-nominate or nominate yourself or nominate someone else for the award. We're encouraging folks to do so. So if you have any questions about those, please feel free to reach out to me. And a couple of highlights from our faculty newsletter: Karen Guerrero and Brendan O'Connor were awarded mini grant funding in March. I don't know, Corinne, you have the topics, but again, they're in the newsletter. And just a reminder to everyone that we accept mini grant applications on a rolling basis. So, but they are supposed to be small research expenses that can be spent immediately. We don't have any opportunity or possibility of carrying those funds over. And just one announcement of an upcoming event sponsored by our Learning Futures Collaborative on refugee and immigrant education. So Thursday, March 30th at 8:30 a.m. Arizona time, there'll be an online discussion of language education policy and refugee immigrant education. It will be moderated by Julie Casper, who's the Director of Teacher Learning and Leadership of the Refugee Educator Academy. So take a look at that in the newsletter for the link, and please register. So with that, we really just want to dive into our topic for today. We have two discussants who will help kick off the discussion. One is Kyle Jensen, who is ASU Director of Writing Programs and a Professor of Writing, Rhetorics, and Literacies. I had the privilege to be involved in a conversation with him a couple of weeks ago, I think, with Learning Scholar Community Chairs, and he's a wealth of information about AI tools. So I'm very happy to welcome him to this conversation again. And we also have, for a different perspective, Rachna Mathur, who, as many of you know, is an EDD student here, CEO and founder of the STEMology Club. And as she will be able to tell you, can speak from a variety of different perspectives on AI tools and their implications for a variety of educational activities. So having said that, what we'd like to do is kick off the conversation by having each of our discussants just briefly provide a little more of an introduction of themselves and a description of their experience with AI tools in education or in general. So Kyle, can I ask you to start?
I'm actually really interested in hearing all about Rachna's cool work. I'm happy to start if you want that to be the case, but what a great intro. How about this? I'll go first quickly, Rachna, and that way you will be boosted by comparison here. My name is Kyle Jensen. I'm the Director of Writing Programs here at ASU. I'm a specialist in modern rhetorical theory and a specialist in writing studies. So my books kind of deal with those two particular issues. I've been writing about artificial intelligence technologies for the better part of 6 or 7 years. I'm particularly interested in the role that they play in content generation. So about 6 or 7 years ago, before ChatGPT kind of made national and international news, generative AI was making news for an altogether different and more peculiar phenomenon. They were facilitating bot to human relationships on illicit websites for extramarital affairs. And it was creating this kind of peculiar crisis about authorship. How can we trust online writing if online writing can solicit in this kind of Ponzi scheme of, leading to higher and higher levels of intimacy, or I don't know if intimacy is probably the right term to describe that. And I've since been studying these technologies as they've evolved. They're not specifically tied to illicit relationships between bots and humans. There's a group called Narrative Science, or they were called Narrative Science, that was actively trying to create content generation for things like sports, like box scores and sporting events and real estate, databases, etc. Currently, I've been working closely with a company called AI 21 Labs based out of Tel Aviv, Israel. They've developed a technology called WordTune, which I can tell you more about. If you have questions, I'll hit the link. I'll hit enter. I put the link here in the chat. And oops, let me hit that again. And if you sign up and let me know what your email address is, I can upgrade you to a premium account so you can noodle around with it and tell me what you think about it in terms of its educational viability. We started integrating WordTune into online courses, online first-year writing courses through Learning Enterprises. I can explain to you why I'm choosing to incorporate WordTune instead of technologies like ChatGPT. But that's basically where I'm at.
Thanks so much, Kyle. Rachna.
Hi, and that's a tough act to follow, Kyle. Super nice to meet you, and thank you for the kind words. And my name is Rachna, and I know the CH can be kind of, depends how you want to pronounce it, tricky. It rhymes, Rachna rhymes with much, like that. So I wear a couple of hats, and I'm at the core a tinkerer. I would say that's kind of the way. And then I use this just to sort of outline sort of where I'm at. So by background, I am a Sun Devil through and through. I have my background in my bachelor's and master's in engineering from the Fulton School of Engineering. I spent a decade in industry at Intel in computer science and software development. But at the time that I went through computer science, I remember taking a course with Dr. Subbarao Kambapati, who is still at ASU, and he taught AI and neural nets. And it was the 90s, and it was like, what do I do with this? And so I went down more of a computer graphics and computer-aided geometric design route, where now I can see, now I dabble in AI in a different way. So I started out with this intention of maybe I would be programming in it, but I just didn't see a job prospect way back when. And from there onwards, I've always been an informal educator. I stay in the outskirts of like after school clubs. So I started my own company. That's where the entrepreneurship comes in. It's called STEMology Club. And the core goal and mission is in sort of tapping into this curiosity of children through STEM in K-6 specifically. Apart from that, as I mentioned, I am a tinkerer, and some of my interest in AI is that of an enthusiast as a student. So as a student, both who had, back in the day, student in engineering, but currently as a student doing my EDD in this program, I'm also probably dabbling in ways that maybe Kyle introduces to his students, or many of you might be coming across as faculty with your students using things like ChatGPT, or and I'll share a bunch of the tools that I use, or day to day the tools that I use in my life as well. My interaction with AI and the tools, again, come as a parent. So, as an example, these are my kids. This is my Alexa in they are always talking to it, and it is, you know, something I got to watch out for. And it just turned on, so I'm going to shut that off. There's another one that's in my house, and you know, and I got to tell them like, stop talking to the robot or be respectful to the robot. That's another one in my house that happens. Is like, I know it's a robot, it's an AI, but still be respectful to it. Don't shout at it. And the other perspective where my connection with AI is, and really where I'm at, is a program I started called Books and Bots. And that that particular program, as a part of my company, is a after school curriculum, a club that I offer, a camp where kids get to come, and we use a AI driven, robotics driven kind of books. There are some really great books that have been written, children's books like The Wild Robot, How to Code a Sandcastle, and it allows us to dive into these topics of computational thinking. We do some coding, we do some fun robotics. Then we talk about AI, and we have, you know, this is a part where this is where my EDD connects, and part of my programs that I'm designing. We look at ethics, bias. I'm going to be doing a professional development in June as a part of my EDD, and actually as part of Dr. Wiley's grant, the ASAP grant, that allows me to sort of explore this with teachers and with students. So those are some of my connections and who I am, and some of the things that I do with AI.
Thanks so much. And one thing I just thought of, if there's a term or tools or things that anyone here is not familiar with, please feel free to post a question in the chat box here, or as just as a reminder, any other questions you might have, please feel free to post. So thanks. So to kick off the discussion, we thought that it might be helpful to have our discussants talk a little bit more about how they use AI in their own work. So how do you use it in teaching, in your personal life, as a student? So who would care to start? Rachna, do you want to start?
Sure.
Mentioned
Sure.
it.
And and I'd like to, you know, I'd really love to hear Kyle's perspective, and even from others here. I think I put a list of tools because the reality is there's so many things written here, but the truth is AI is in so many parts of our lives. Much of it is hidden, much of it we don't think about. So on a day-to-day, just to live as a person and to be a student and just be in this world, whether I know it or not, I'm using AI. And so some of the tools that very specifically that I'm using right now, Notion, Grammarly. So Notion is a note-taking tool. And these are some of the things that we're talking about in this, the AI and Education Learning Futures Collaborative. So just as a reference, as one of the 5 LFCs that's part of the Teachers College, I'm one of the doctoral students that's part of that, with Punya and Sean and Scotty Craig and a few others. We've got Jim Dunnigan and Kerry from Thunderbird. So there's a few of us, and May, who's a doctoral student. So one of the things that we talk about is like, okay, as a student, you know, what are the things I'm using right now to do my EDD? So I'll talk from that perspective, since maybe some of you might connect with that. Notion is an example where I'm taking my notes, and just, I would say, last month only, they added an AI feature. And so, you know, I can type in, you know, I need some ideas. So look at that, or a ChatGPT are like thought partners for me. I'm very cautious because I don't trust its references. And, you know, I wouldn't say do a lit review. I'm really not sure what it'll throw out, but I do use it as a thought partner. And then Grammarly is editing your, editing some of your writing. But if I talk about some more fun ones, and I'll show you like some, you know, what I share with my kids. When I share with my kids like AI in my life, I show them this slide, and I say, you know, I show them my phone and the streaming services we use. But the one that I most recently, as an example, for generating images, I needed, so I created this program called Books and Bots, and I don't have the money or the time or the know-how to design a logo for that particular content. And so I use Midjourney, and that is an AI-based tool to generate these like little robots over here. And they're super cute, but questionable, because I'm really not sure. Maybe, you know, I'd love to hear Kyle's perspective. I'm always wondering, I haven't posted this yet because I'm like, well, is this okay or not? So those are the questions that I'm asking. as I look at like, is this taking somebody's content? What about is this plagiarism? So those are the things that I'm grappling with. So it's not published yet, so I'm thinking about that. So those are just a few of the things that I look at. Lateral.io, another one. That's one that Jim Dunnigan's looking at to see, could our students use that for reference management? Can we use ChatGPT in conjunction with it to think about how we write our papers? So that was me from the perspective of a doctoral student. And Kyle, what do you do? What are some things you use for your students and for yourself?
The sound is breaking up. I hope it's not my computer, but I think I heard you ask about how I use it in my classes. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah. Is my sound breaking up?
It did for me a little bit, but
Okay.
I won't presume to assume anybody else's status. There we go, better now. Okay, so within the classroom, the technologies that I'm using in generative AI need to walk alongside students. That's the criteria that I use to evaluate whether or not an AI technology is valuable for my students and valuable as a pedagogical resource for writing. There are a lot of, as Rachna very aptly demonstrated, there are a lot of different ways that tools can be incorporated into your writing process. ChatGPT can function as a thought partner. My concern consistently is to what extent does it preempt the writing process? To what extent does it appeal to specific types of insecurities that students by definition bring with them to the writing process? And I always want to know, like, my own view, for example, of using Grammarly is that it tends to kind of deficit attitude of writing because it defines writing primarily in terms of correction. Its language model, the language model that it's built on, is not as complex as ChatGPT or AI or WordTune with AI 21 Labs. And so the main functional difference between the two is that whereas ChatGPT and WordTune generate a lot of different kinds of content that students have to make decisions about, other kinds of AI technologies that are baked into Microsoft Word or Google Docs or any other kind of word processing tend to focus primarily on correction. It's not necessarily that we're particularly worried that students write correct sentences. I think that having fluent sentences that are grammatically correct and free of typos is a good thing. You're not going to hear me say that. But what I do think is that students are not always taught to think very critically about the tools that they incorporate into their writing process, and as a result of that tend to develop attitudes that are encouraged, that are baked into the technology itself to make it expedient. Well, with writing processes, and this is kind of what I study for a living, expedient writing processes don't always lend themselves to the greatest forms of critical thinking or reflection. So what I'm looking to do is lengthen the writing process to open it up a little bit, to give students greater opportunities for feedback loops so that they're making decisions. They're creating possibilities and making decisions about those particular types of technologies. One of the ways that we can facilitate that process, and I'm doing it in this semester in particular, is having students learn methods for studying the history and evolution of AI technology. So in my classes, you don't use a tool without learning about its history, how it came to be what it is, how people are defining it in the present, and where people are speculating where it might be headed in the future. That doesn't necessarily mean that, those opinions should be determinative, but what I want my students to do is negotiate competing perspectives, kind of lay them side by side so that they can hear the possibilities and the limits of the technologies themselves, so that they can make decisions about whether or not they want to incorporate them in their writing process in the future. I think about this pretty proactively when I'm, reflecting on my own personal relationship to AI. The kind of AI that is baked into my SUV, so that if I veer too much into the middle lane, one of my cars will beep at me and another one will self-correct and pull me into the center lane. Most of the time that works really well, but other times it doesn't read the situation as accurately as I'm reading it as a human. And so I'm having to work against the AI in that particular instance. If we think about writing technologies and any other kind of image-based technology, that's a helpful analogy for what it might be like to interface with those kind of AI technologies on an intellectual level. We need to be able to not just simply recognize when we're being positioned into a particular lane. We need to build out a vocabulary and locate that particular tendency in the technology within a broader historical, theoretical, and material scope. So that's probably a complicated way of explaining what I do, probably a lot less engaging, but that's what I'm after. And I can give concrete examples if that would be helpful to folks, but I'm very wary, as a bookish introvert, I'm wary of talking too long, so I will stop there.
Thanks so much to both of you. Is really exciting and a lot of information. So maybe let's take a moment. Does anyone else want to share something, question? Please post it or speak up. We'd love to hear what you're thinking now. Are you confused? Do you have particular questions about tools or topics you'd like to bring up?
I'm wondering if, thank you for everything so far. I'm wondering if we could talk a little bit about ethics for, I guess, research for us as researchers, and where that line is, or do we know, or what are people thinking at this point? And then also in our classes for students, and what that line is. And I'm thinking in particular, I teach people are going to be teachers, and there have been articles about how that AI ChatGPT can help teachers with planning, which once they're teachers is terrific, but for assignments for our classes, maybe something different. So, but then I also think about myself as a researcher and a writer, and what the lines are there. So I'm interested in what people have been thinking and talking about as far as ethics in those two areas.
Great question. Anyone want to jump in? Anyone who's thought about this or wants to add a perspective?
I'm sure there's like tons. I mean, I'm kind of curious to hear from the community here too. I mean, I've got tons of thoughts around this. I see a comment from Leroy. Similar to the advent of the calculator, we will need to rethink a lot of the structural elements of education. That's a really great point. I can speak to kind of where my mind is at. Mine is often at K-12, but then also the second part where I exist as personally as a student in this space. And I wonder, as I'm going to submit my dissertation next year, and I'm learning to be a researcher, and I see my chair on here, in fact, and I'm going, so where is that line? And for one, some of the things I've decided for the lack of it being a rule or a regulation or a structure at the moment is things like, okay, well, I will give credit where it's due, and that can be clear. So if I have used some form of AI, which I'm not certain yet how much of it I will lean on yet, then I would be sure to say ChatGPT, or if I generated some images that are going to be used in that document, to say that they were created in this way. But I think it does take some thought. I don't have an answer per se. I'm just speaking from the perspective of a student too. But as a teacher in K-12, some of the things I look at a little bit easier for me when I'm doing it after school, but when I'm working with teachers who are doing their professional development with me, is one of them is to not have the Terminator complex or this fear of that AI, but at the same time, recognizing that they are not controlled, that we have not created regulations around them yet at a national or global level necessarily. And a lot of the ed tech sector will sweep in with all these amazing tools. I've been a part of those sectors. My family, my husband works in that sector, so just sweeping in with tools with like, hey, we have these great safety features and we're using AI, or hey, there's so much. I think this taking a step back and just truly understanding it is really, really important from a school and from the administration, whether it's a university or K-12 level, and just sort of deciding, you know, who are the other experts we need to bring in other than ourselves. And I have to do the same. And that's why I'm part of the LFC too, is to have those discussions and say, you know, am I thinking about this correctly? And the information is changing so fast. So Kyle, I'd love to hear your perspective, or somebody else that's here too.
Yeah, there's a question in the chat that I think is particularly interesting, but it would help me to have a little bit more context, because I think it's a question that maybe I'm capable of answering. I'm not obviously capable of answering all AI related questions. It says, will the writing process get less evaluative in the future? With AI writing assistants, in the past we were using them mainly for correction, but now ChatGPT opens a bigger field, but it does come with a risk of incorrect data. Rezwana, can you explain what you mean by get less evaluative? Because I think that that's a pretty important question. Before it was about autocorrect. Okay. Yeah, I think the thing that I'm having difficulty understanding is like maybe we just are working from different definitions of how to teach the writing process. So I don't see a scenario where it becomes less evaluative. In fact, I think it probably becomes an occasion to think more critically about the kinds of tools that we're using to inform our writing process, and that creates, and then in the process of creating those points of context, we can think critically about whether or not an artificial intelligence tool is giving us good advice or not. I said in the beginning that I lean generally toward technologies that create more than one option. It's not simply a matter of just having the ability to choose and kind of cycle through options, but presenting multiple options simultaneously. And the criteria that we use in our courses is we ask students to think critically about how, in their writing process, how specific options that they select or encounter correlate to 3 basic criteria: audience, purpose, and situation. And so in a certain sense, the AI technology can really create an occasion to think critically about how the words that we're using, it helps break apart the sentences in such a way, or the paragraphs in such a way that we can think more critically about how they're articulating with a chosen audience, purpose, and situation. I will say too that one of the activities that I do in my courses, and these are upper division English courses, is I ask students to think about what kind of voice AI writes in, and whether or not they identify with that particular voice. I imagine that eventually the voices, the large language models will be so complex that you may have a certain amount of agency over what type of voice it produces in. But if we think about the kind of students that we serve at ASU, first gen or underrepresented students, we actively target those students, and we want them to come in and learn from us and enrich our communities. We have a number of students in my classes in particular that that look at the sentences that are produced by a WordTune or by a ChatGPT, and they say, I wouldn't write like that. And so it creates an occasion to think, well, if you don't identify with that particular voice, are you going to feel obligated to incorporate it? And what does that teach us about the politics of language, particularly as facilitated by certain kinds of AI technologies? Does it create an occasion to intervene in the development of artificial intelligence and make sure that a greater number of voices are represented, greater number of dialects, not just languages as well, so that when you write something, that it is commensurate with the identity that you want to project. One thing we know absolutely about the writing process and writing research is that when we write, we feel as if we are presenting ourselves. And sometimes, historically, especially with academic writing, there's a misalignment there, especially with underrepresented populations. So we want to ask those kinds of questions. And if AI tools can provide the occasion to do that, I think that's a really helpful contribution that they can make.
thanks so much to you and well, to everyone with their questions and comments. I don't know if we want to go directly to some of the questions again in the chat. Sarup has posed one that's interesting to kind of shift the focus a bit about AI-powered adaptive learning in various learning environments. And I don't know, Sarup, if you have a more specific question there, you're kind of just raising the topic. Do you want reactions to that? Example?
Yeah, I was just thinking about, the role of AI, particularly for students with special needs. So I just feel like it is really sort of allows us to apply the same principles that we follow for teaching kids with special needs. I just wanted to generate some thinking around that.
That's like a really great question. I have some just from a AI powered adaptive learning in, and I'm not sure if I can speak to it specifically to students with special needs, but if I look at it as just even as a parent or someone who is in that K-12 space, I'm going to put up like a couple of such thoughts. Like one is even understanding what some of those adaptive tools are. Like Duolingo is an adaptive tool that our kids in Khan World School and ASU Prep use right now. And Khan World School is a partnership with ASU Prep. Or they're not using ChatGPT per se because there's still some questions around that. But Van Robotics, you might consider their tool, which is a physical robot coupled with a piece of software that goes in a classroom to be an assistant to the teacher, to be also something that might be that has these adaptive learning kind of pieces. So when you talk about, especially for students with special needs, I do think that things like these kind of robots, these ones that have a physical and digital entity like Van Robotics or Moxie by Embodied AI. Moxie is a social emotional learning robot. They're creating a new space for how they interact with students, the kinds of students that they might be targeting or being able to help. So I think that might be an interesting one to explore is some of these like Moxie and how it works with special needs students. And I haven't had a chance. I'm trying to get my hands on one of these robots to sort of play with them, but I haven't had a chance to go check them out. I think there's one of the Van Robotics robots in Mesa, but I've heard that, there are things ranging from like it's patient, it alleviates repetitive kind of tasks and learning situations off of the teacher so they can focus. It allows for like one-to-one learning with students. So those are some of the things with that I think can apply to multiple groups of student learners.
And Sarup, I'll just jump in and add that through parent groups with parents who have children with special needs, there's been a lot of discussion about using ChatGPT to help write IEP goals as they're preparing to go into these meetings. So that's another area, and also to help write lesson plans when they're targeting certain behaviors. So I think parents are starting to use this quite a bit as well.
Hi, this is Leroy. I think it's a fantastic discussion that we're having here. I'm in the technology field, been in technology field for well over 20 plus years. I've worked with Microsoft, I've been working with Microsoft for 19 years. The reality is, we have always, as a human society, have embraced technology. And this is just another form of using computerization, to help us advance and to make life easier. And I have a little bit of bias associated with the way I think and the way I operate. My wife, who's a teacher, slapped me in the head every now and then to say that, a drawback she sees is the fact of, limited creativity when we rely more on technological solutions such as ChatGPT and all of the variants that exist. But there are clear benefits. Well, there are multiple drawbacks I'm sure we can bring forward, such as ethical and privacy issues, or the potential for to make mistakes, or erroneous data being brought to the surface, and plagiarism. So we can list all of those things that are currently we are grappling with as a society, whether it be in education and other institutional structure. But clearly, if we take a step back and look at how technology as technological solutions have helped, we can see that there is benefit ahead, right? Whether it's be in content creation or in terms of language learning or personalized settings and learning for people, whether you have special needs or not. Or in terms of adaptive learning and virtual reality or speech. There are just so many benefits that will come to the forefront as they iron out where we're at and where technology will go. And the reality is, it is inevitable. So right now we're just at the crux, and we've just seen a flare or an example of a generative text capability, but AI and to the audience and to those discussant has been around for a while. So the public has just been exposed to it now. And it's the awe and shock that's behind it. But there's a lot of other technological elements of AI that has been here for several decades. So now we're just seeing the mass usage, and it will continue to permeate across all spectrum. So it's now a matter of, okay, how would we adapt? How do we change? What does it mean for that creative juice that people are supposed to be exerting, right? Rather than relying heavily on the technology, how can it become more of a complement? What we do, how we work, how we play, how we exist as a culture are some of the things that we really need to rethink. And as I said, I'm biased. The reality is that it's not going to go away. If anything, it's going to get even more enshrined into our existence as a human race, as a society, to be honest with you.
Yeah, thanks for those comments, Leroy. I agree with just about everything you said. And I think that if folks are interested in learning more about the trajectory of AI development, particularly as it affects labor conditions, and which obviously affects teaching conditions. I've been teaching a really great book called The End of Work by Daniel Susskind. I'm looking for the book around, oh, here it is. A World Without Work by Daniel Susskind. And it's an accessible book, kind of explains the emergence, the emergence of new digital technologies relate to workforce development. Leroy, your comments had me thinking about his argument in relationship to AI having a complementing force, meaning, as Rachna said earlier, its ability to function as a kind of thought partner and really enhance the kind of creative work that we do that could not have been done without the intervention of that particular kind of technology. And then it also has a kind of substituting force, meaning that there are going to be things that the technology does that make certain forms of human labor that existed prior to the emergence of that technology obsolete. So for example, one of the ways that I know AI 21 Labs incorporates or sells its technology is to have companies like Amazon that need to write a ton of product descriptions, and they need to hire writers to do that. With generative AI, they don't need to do that with large language modeling quite as much, or the work becomes fundamentally different. And so I guess as a nerdy scholar in the English department, I would admonish everyone to please just learn from history as we evaluate the future prospects of how the inevitability of AI. I agree with you, Leroy, that it is going to be seamlessly incorporated into all forms of professional and personal life. But there is a difference between accepting, being properly scrutinizing the inevitability of the emergence of a certain kind of technology, and making sure that we're holding the developers of those technologies accountable, and ensuring that such technologies are not creating greater distances between those who already have advantages and those who do not.
Spot on, Kyle, 100%. I'm going to give you a real life story, what's happening now in my company. Because of budgetary concerns, we have started to cut back on our support personnel across the board. Microsoft has announced 10,000 job layoffs, and I anticipate it will continue. If you read the news just today, Zuckerberg on the Facebook side, Meta, has announced that we will see layoff happening for years to come, right? And it's going to accelerate. And what is happening that companies are using technological solutions such as AI to replace worker. I've seen it in my workplace. We now have to figure out, we've been asked to come up with AI cases to replace certain tier of the workforce from the perspective of our support personnel that's operated at a tier 1 that answers questions. We now need to move that into a sort of a chat GPT type of realm where an end user will interact with thousands of knowledge articles rather than having a ticket goes to a support level resource. It can be done in terms of a self-serve type of modality. That's a reality today that's happening. And I anticipate that will only accelerate in the near term. Because companies are constrained budgetary, well, depending on which organization, and they're continuing to rely on the technological solutions to help offset areas in which they have made decision to cut back on. So I'm seeing it happening. It's going to happen in various industries, and they're going to try to substitute and rely more on the tech as a way of cost saving. That's just another, it's sad, but that's a reality.
And so for what it's worth, I have 3 little girls at home, and I'm charged with making sure that they feel prepared for the world that they enter into when they go into higher ed and eventually into the workforce. And I know a number of you have asked questions in the chat about incorporating such technologies at the level of K through 12. My daughters noodle around with these kinds of technologies pretty regularly. I ask them what they think about it, but mostly what I'm asking them, one of my daughters has a disability, and her twin sister does not. And what I try to do is triangulate their experiences with the technology. Mostly what I'm interested in is how the technology makes them feel relative to the learning process, and see what kind of descriptive terms emerge in our conversations. And I try to do that longitudinally as well. So when I first gave them WordTune, they know, one of the people that I work with is really wonderful and kind to them, and they talk about Harry Potter. And so the glow of Harry Potter shines onto the technologies, and they say, this is really exciting. But I want to ask them, systematically over the course of their learning process, is this actually informing in meaningful ways the way that you're imagining the work of writing? And if so, tell me about that, and documenting that and having thoughtful conversations about it. Because as Leroy mentioned, we are at the kind of like the starting gate for this. The technology is incredibly advanced, but because it's reaching such a popular level of awareness, we have the ability, and there are a lot of companies who are reaching out saying, we need to know how we're coming across, and we need to know what users would like to see. And it's really incumbent upon academics and non-academics alike to participate in those conversations, because if it is going to reach a saturation point, as I think it absolutely will, it's better to have that be a democratic process where all of the voices are converging on it, recognizing that there are plenty of AI technologies that are exciting and enhance creativity, and there are also AI technologies that re-articulate deeply entrenched the worst parts of our deeply entrenched structural limits as it relates to underrepresented races, ethnicities, and genders and sexualities. So we just need to be mindful of that and participate actively in it.
So just kind of building on that point, a couple of other early comments. As you were talking, Kyle, I was thinking how lucky your daughters are to have you as a parent be able to support them in thinking about and using these tools. And I'm already just sitting here thinking of who's going to be left out of these conversations, and actually even left out of a basic introduction to what these tools are doing, because I do see a lot of great potential for them as well as disadvantage. But I'm also thinking, for example, of teachers and who has the time and who doesn't to learn about these tools, much less incorporate them into what they're doing. So I don't know if that's just a statement or a question, but I'd be interested in other people's thoughts about that. And
I'd be
yeah.
interested in jumping in on that just because
Right.
I feel like I'm directly in that space in K-12. I relate a lot of what Kyle said. I have two little kids, 5 and 11, and they are, like you said, it's fortunate, we have a technical backgrounds in our home, computer engineering and education, both of my husband and I. He's an education strategist at a tech company. So our conversations, are around these things. It makes it easier for them. But we also talk about how that leaves out a lot of people from these conversations. And so one of the spaces that, I think is important, why I really, jumped onto the Arizona STEM Acceleration Project, that the grant with Dr. Wiley, is it's looking at educating our educators and sharing and exposing these kind of STEM related topics. The one that I'm diving into through my research and my work is exposing computational thinking, which ties directly to our aspects of robotics and AI, sharing that with our teachers. And some of it is just these really basic conversations that we're having, like, okay, just sitting there and thinking about, first of all, what is it? And then what do we mean by AI? What does it mean? These tools, like the conversations we're having, and what are these things that we can do? And what are, our concerns on ethics and bias? But I think that has to happen in a larger way, where our opportunity to expose both the teachers and students who are going to move in a way, and they use these tools in such a different way than we could think of or even conceive. We also have to think of how is AI affecting them. I think we're always thinking, at least I'm always thinking, like, about, okay, what does it mean for the future and all these ethics and bias questions. But I wonder what now, what does it mean for these students? How does it affect their being, their social emotional health? How does it affect their perception on how they communicate? Because I might want to communicate a certain way, but students are communicating on TikTok or Snapchat, which I don't still use in that same way. In the same way, I expect AI also to shift how we interact in a society, how we are. And there's some things that I have to shift in myself about it. But being able to have those conversations exposed, I think, very much in that K-12 realm, and if it could, K-6 really, why I like that space, start early, like Kyle is with his kids, I might be with mine, and getting more people involved in that conversation through our public schooling is a great place to kind of think about that. So that was also just a set of comments.
Thanks so much, Rachna.
And Elizabeth, I agree with everything Rachna just said, and I want to add one thing to it because it's an important wrinkle. But before I say it, I want to let you know that I'm going to tell my daughters that you said that they're lucky to have me as a dad, and I have everybody here in a recording on witness, so this is going to happen. Thank you very much for that. That is public record at this point. Listen, I specialize in writing and writing instruction. I administer one of the largest writing programs in the country, but I'm also a scholar of rhetoric, and my current research is moving into areas of listening. What are the conditions that allow us to encounter perspectives that are different than our own? Rachna has said pretty consistently, I want to make sure everybody takes note of it, that there are questions about AI that raise ethical problems. And I want everybody to hear me say this, because working with folks who have a lot of technical expertise can cause those who don't have a lot of technical expertise to say, well, we're just going to let them handle it. The reality of the situation is this, that a lot of the education that we can provide at the K to 6, 6 to 12, and even post-secondary level is helping students understand why they might have a visceral reaction or negative reaction to a certain kind of technology, irrespective of whether or not they actually interface with that particular technology. And as educators, we're particularly well prepared to have those conversations with students, to ask them to step back, to critically reflect, to ask, why is it that that particular technology produces that kind of visceral reaction? I'll give you a good case study. In the Learning Enterprise course that I oversee and helped develop that incorporates these kind of AI technologies, we received a very angry email from a student who was enrolled in the class. The student hadn't actually opened the curriculum, did not have any kind of knowledge about how we were incorporating AI technology into to facilitate the learning process and the writing process. And it was a pay-in on why we were so immoral, allowing AI technologies to co-opt his learning process. That's not a question about technology. That's a question about how open that particular student may be to encountering a perspective that is different than their own. And whether we like it or not, we are in a state right now that is becoming increasingly conservative about exposing K-12 students to perspectives that are different than their own. And so I want to encourage everybody here who very obviously cares about education, that the question of AI and AI writing in particular touches issues of identity, community, what ownership is, what counts as intellection, what counts as knowledge and knowledge production, what counts as creativity. You all talk about these issues regularly with your students and the teachers that you're training, and those conversations are not ancillary or not incident. They are absolutely connected to they facilitate the student's ability to receive technology in the space where they can think creatively with it, but also identify its limits. So I just want to emphasize that you don't have to have technical expertise and you don't have to have experience with artificial intelligence technologies to create the space where students and teachers are capable of using these technologies in a way that is open and willing to identify the possibilities and the limits simultaneously. Sorry.
Thank you so much. I was just sitting here thinking we all should reflect on those kinds of things, our visceral reactions, because I know I myself have those when certain topics come up. So thank you so much for taking us to that level. I'm cognizant that we do not have much time left, unfortunately, and I think this is a topic we might want to explore in future sessions. But one just final question or comment. Kyle, Rachna, anyone, any recommendations for next steps for someone who's interested in learning more about AI tools, or, just increasing their own knowledge in this area? And folks, feel free to put some things in the chat. I saw Rachna earlier, you posted some things aimed more, I think, at K6 maybe, but any last comments from folks, suggestions, where to go from here?
Hi, my name is Jill Lovell, and I work at ASU Prep. I am a Next Gen Learning Coordinator, and I'm also in the EDD program. And I can tell you where I'm going next, because next week we are supporting our K-12 teachers through an ed camp. And I'm giving, I put it in the chat, but I'm giving a session on just kind of understanding how this isn't something to be scared of. It's not something that's going to go away. So if we're thinking about like a calculator, I'm sure when a calculator came out, math teachers in the past were like, no, students are going to cheat forever. And then now there's even photo math, which is even harder to deal with. And so I think that my team, what we are doing is we want to kind of build excitement about this, to say like, this is something that's exciting. It's not going to go away. If anything, it's just going to continue to become stronger and more refined. And so how can we harness the power of this to like make our lives easier? And so next week when I'm working with the teachers, I'm just going to talk about how this is something that could help your personal workload, and how like look at the positives of this, but then through that lens of what is ethical when you're using it. And then also kind of like what Kyle was saying earlier, that where's the voice? Because it's not replacing you as a teacher in the classroom. And you can clearly see when you ask certain things that the voice that comes out it's not you. And I think that you would very quickly see that it's not your student's voice, and the students would very quickly see that it's not your voice either. So it's kind of like, how can we build excitement, but then also just be mindful about using it going forward?
I want to kind of tag on what Jill said. And, from my perspective, given my length of history with technology, I don't think this is something to panic that much about, because there seems to be a lot of panic about it. I think a good analogy here would be what happened when MOOCs emerged and the panic the academy went into when MOOCs emerged, oh, they're going to destroy the university, blah, 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 you know, and all that went on for a couple of years. And then what happened? We co-opted them and we use them for our own uses now. They're pathway programs for the university, and they represent a bunch of different, you know, a couple of different pathways to get into higher ed. I think ultimately the same thing is going to happen with a lot of these AI technologies. We're going to co-opt them. We're going to make them an integral part of our process. The one place I disagree with Jill is where she said it's not your voice coming out. I would refine her statement and say it's not your voice coming out yet. I think that will come as the size of the language models grow, and part of that growing will be incorporating work we've done and work we've written in the past for each individual person. It'll eventually become part of that language model, and I expect in another few years you will be able to hear your voice when you ask ChatGPT to write you a story about a gorilla or whatever.
Thanks. Other comments, suggestions? If not, a reminder that we will post a recording of this session and notes, including some of the information about tools on our site. Clarin, I don't know how long that usually takes to get that up there, but it'll be there before too long. Thank you all for a great discussion. Rachna, Kyle, for sharing your perspectives, and everyone else. It was a really, really engaged conversation. Just in terms of upcoming sessions, next week we do not have a just an hour session. Hope to see many of you, most of you, at our in-person all college meeting on West Campus. The following week, we have a just an hour session that's March 31st on creative teaching practices. And I'm delighted to say that our discussants will be Juliet Barnett, Steve Salek, and Mo Walters. So please, if you're interested in the topic, make a point to look out for that one. So with that, have a wonderful afternoon. Again, happy St. Patrick's Day, and hope to see you all soon. Thanks again.